Happy Thursday, everybody. All right. So yesterday we talked about, just the geographical features of China and how those created a very kind of like isolated culture for a large part of their history. And then we went on to talk about the Shang Dynasty, followed by the Zhou Dynasty. And we talked about their three schools of thought: Taoism, Confucianism, and legalism. And so we're picking up today with the Shin Dynasty. And this particular dynasty really only lasts during the lifespan of one man. And you'll find out soon enough why. Uh, and so, um, so here we go. All right. So this man right here, Shin Huangdi, he is the first Shin emperor. That's actually what his name means. And yes, you are reading that right. At the age of 13, he begins to rule because it is determined that he has the mandate of heaven. And initially, he seems like awesome, right? Like, I mean, he proves himself very kind of well right off the bat because he unites these 7 territories that were still fighting in this, like, again, continual period of civil war known as the period of the Warring States. And he unites these 7 territories and brings them back together, and he starts building all of this infrastructure. He actually creates, as it says, this single monetary system that helps everyone out economically speaking. And then what he does that's really, truly unprecedented is he actually takes land away from the aristocrats and he gives that land to the peasants. And so, of course, the peasants are the largest group of people really in any civilization at this point. And of course, they're also the most powerless population of people because they don't have anything. And so here he is giving the largest portion of the population a little bit of power by giving them a little bit of land and giving them a little bit of an opportunity. So, of course, this takes power away from the aristocracy. That's his biggest threat. And he doesn't want them saying that he's lost the mandate at any point in time during his reign. And then, of course, he's got the power of the people, the peasants, behind him because he's giving them this land. But if you can tell by the tone of my voice that there's a catch, there is. So here's the deal. If you own land, you have to pay taxes on that land. And if you are a peasant, okay, the land is all fine and dandy, but it's going to be kind of hard for a lot of these peasants to come up with the taxes necessary to keep it. And so the trick here was that, of course, everybody's really excited at first, but then gradually it's like, oh, I see you can't pay your taxes. Well, like that's a part of being a landowner is you got to pay the tax. And so it was, you know what? I'm not that bad of a guy. So here's what we're going to do. Since you can't pay your taxes, you're going to come work for me. So hello, indentured servitude labor force. That's pretty much how he gets millions and millions of peasants working for working for him during his reign, doing all of the projects that were built and created during his reign. And there were several of them, and we'll talk about them here in a minute. So yeah, sounds really good, but you got to read that fine print. So one of the things that he actually begins building within his first year, so I mean 13 at the time, of his reign is his necropolis, his tomb. He was kind of obsessed with immortality. Like he wanted to achieve immortality, which in my opinion just proves how much of a narcissist he really was. But his entire life he's trying to seek essentially like the elixir of life and trying to figure out a way that he can live forever. Of course, spoiler alert, he fails. But anyways, his tomb is one of the most like spectacular historical finds of the 20th century. And it's a large reason why people actually visit China. Most students think that the only reason why people kind of go to China is to go see the Great Wall. And that actually is not true. There's tons of stuff to see in China, historically speaking. And this is definitely one of them. It's not discovered until 1974 by farmers digging a well. And they kind of stumble across, of course, they're looking down and they're like, what is that down there? And they stumble across these clay warriors like you see in the picture. And of course, archaeologists are called in and they begin excavating the site and they realize that they have found the tomb of Shin Shing Huangdi. And he believed, like a lot of people believed at that time frame in history, you see it all over the globe, that the things that were buried with you got to go with you to the afterlife. We talked about that when we talked about Egypt. There are, things like that were even in, Persia, ancient Persia, and tombs that they had found. It's found all over the place, that belief system. And so he had this huge army, like it says, 6,000 figures. There's actually 6,000 to 8,000 figures within the tomb itself of soldiers and horses and chariots and artists. And I'm talking like all kinds of clay people that he was taking. He wanted to take essentially his, like the most important people that he valued with him to the afterlife, and he believed these representations of those people would go with him. So when I say it's big, like it's big, it is a massive tomb. And here's the cool part. Okay, the part that he is buried at, okay, his tomb where he is lying, and all around it is supposed to be this amazing, gorgeous, huge palace underground. And he is supposedly surrounded by a river of mercury with like mountains of bronze work and all of this incredible, of course, jewelry and artifacts. But archaeologists haven't been allowed to open his tomb yet because of the mercury. It's actually, considered to be a huge safety issue, not only for the people that may be the excavation team, but also just, to the artifacts and then the ground around the tomb. If there's a large amount of mercury in there, it could be kind of bad because mercury can be, of course, very toxic. But he believed mercury to have like magical and mystical powers, and he believed it to be this like elixir, so that's why he was kind of surrounded by it. But anyways, if you'll look closely at the image kind of to my bottom left there, the soldiers' faces, this is also just the attention to detail. There were, I think, 7 or 8 different busts. So that means like facial schemes to the soldiers so that they didn't all look alike. And they even had different hairdos. They had different ranks. And so their outfits were different. They held different weapons to indicate, of course, like whether or not they were swordsmen or whether or not they were archers. And so, there's cavalry. That's the picture there on the bottom right with the horses. So really just an incredible tomb. And you can imagine what it took and the labor force that it took to build this. So the scheme of, I'm going to get the peasants on my side with land, but then when they can't pay the taxes, I'll conscript them into a labor force. This is where they went. Another thing that he built along with his tomb and thousands of miles also of road was the Great Wall of China. Now, he didn't build the Great Wall of China that we see in this picture and that we oftentimes think of. A lot of students don't realize that the Great Wall of China actually had been built originally across the northern portion of China where the Gobi Desert is. And it wasn't made of stone. It was actually made of like sand and water and hay that was compacted together. And so if you go to like the Gobi Desert there along the border of modern day China and Mongolia, or even like further into China, portions of the wall are very, of course, eroded because, it's sand and water and hay. And you wouldn't even realize like that was the Great Wall of China at one point. There's literally thousands of miles of kind of differing levels of engineering and history that aren't just the stone version in the mountains that we always see and think about. So, but he did begin. He kind of there were rudimentary walls, but he really took it to the next level and created a much larger, bigger version of the wall that, of course, will be expanded upon during later dynasties when the Mongols become more of a threat. And the Xiongnu word that actually is pronounced Shangyu, they are the precursors to the Mongols. Okay, they are basically the Mongols' ancestors, and they are kind of consistently an issue on China's northern border throughout its history. And they're going to be the ones, of course, that the Great Wall is built to try to keep out. And, it doesn't do that great of a job of it, but they try. It's a bit of a deterrent, but it doesn't keep them out completely. So, the reason why Shin, believed that he was just this great ruler is he believed actually in legalism. If you'll remember from our lesson yesterday, legalism is this like inherent belief that people are naturally evil and crappy. And the only way to keep them from like not being evil and crappy is through, very harsh laws. And if you break those very harsh laws, then very harsh punishments. And so, he kind of in his mind, he thinks that he's like saving his civilization from being evil. And of course, you can see why legalism became popular towards the end of the Zhou dynasty and towards the end of the period of the Warring States, because people had been used to years and years and years of civil war at that point. And so their outlook on humanity was pretty bleak, because all they had seen was killing and people fighting one another. So yeah, sure, legalism sounded good because it created stability. And they were used to chaos and people wanted stability. And so, but he takes it a little too far. Obviously, legalism is one of those ideologies that's not all that great. And it's especially not all that great when truly, done in a way in which an entire society is under the thumb of this one person that's a bit of a narcissist and a bit of a sociopath. So, but he does do some like decent stuff. One of the things that he creates is this 3-branch system of government. And we know all too well that works pretty nicely. Hello, we have the executive, the judicial, and the legislative here in the United States, and there are other places, of course, that do the 3-branch ideology, and so it does work well. And he creates that within Chinese history. He has a civil division, a military division, and then he has the censorate. Now, the censorate under Shen Xing Huangdi's rule is very much like watchdog. They're going into the civil and the military divisions, and anybody not doing what they're supposed to be doing, or anyone that isn't following legalism to the harshness that Shin expects, it really wasn't a warning. It was more like you're dead. It was, like I said, very harsh punishment if you weren't doing your job. So you can imagine by the end of his life, he is not a popular dude. And, that's why. So how did that work out for you? He actually is quoted in saying that he believed his rule would be enjoyed by his sons and grandsons for 10,000 generations. And 4 years after he died, his son was overthrown. So not a big surprise there. Nobody wanted more Shin rule after he died. And after he dies, that is when the Han Dynasty takes over. So this is a cool video about the Terracotta Army and about his tomb that we're watching in class today. And as I always say, please watch the embedded videos. They help, kind of drive a lot of the things home that I'm saying with visuals. And so, again, those of you at home online, don't forget to watch these. All right, so I am going to go ahead and teach the Han Dynasty today as well. I know on the board it said that it was slated for Friday, but we were able to actually get through the Han today. Now we are not in class getting to the crash course video about China there at the end. We're saving that, so in the morning, my students in class are going to watch that as a pretty good little review of everything we've talked about, and then take part B of your Unit 1B formative. So just kind of know that's what's going on tomorrow and why I went ahead and lumped the Shin and the Han into this one video. So again, the Han are going to be who comes in after Shin is dead and gone. And of course, they completely abandon legalism, but they adopt completely Confucian thinking and Confucian ways. And they do keep the 3-branch system that Shin implemented. So they do have their government split into military, civil, and the censorate. But the censorate is no longer like, if you're not doing your job, we're going to kill you. It's more like, if you're not doing your job, we're going to replace you. And one of the cool things that the Han does is they completely adopt Confucian's belief in a merit-based government official. So now all of a sudden, government positions are opened up to like merchants. And maybe you're the son of an artisan. Maybe you're even the son of a peasant. And how they went about this is they had essentially a standardized test that was based on Confucian text. It was a civil service examination, kind of like, and it was a litmus test for your intelligence and for your ability to kind of know the system. And, depending upon how well you did on the test, determined like how high up you got to be placed within the government. And so really, like I said, completely adopted the Confucian way of doing things. And because of that, they really were highly successful as a dynasty. At the height of the Han, China was very, very successful trading. They then got, like out of their isolation and began to trade with other people, even as far as, what like ancient Persia and places like that. And, I know that the slide says peasants suffer, but I mean, hello, they're peasants. There's never going to be a slide that you see in my class that's like, peasants are doing great. It's because at the end of the day, again, they're peasants. So they were doing better under the Han at its height than they were doing under the Shin. Taxes are, of course, much lighter, but they do have to serve in the military. They do have to work for 1 month per year for the government. But the biggest issue that they started to have, and this is an issue with any government. Once a government gives something to its people, it's very, very difficult to ever say like, okay, we can't give that to you anymore. We're going to need that back. It's an issue that we even face today, like with the debate over Social Security and things like that. And it's because, the people begin to, of course, expect this, like it's an expectation of the people. And, the government doesn't know how to sever that expectation without potential like uprisings and things like that. Well, again, you have to remember Shen Xing Huangdi gave the peasants land. And so the peasants that were able to hang on to that land and still had it, and didn't go off and die in forced labor camps, essentially, now the newer peasants are like, okay, well, these older peasants got this land under Shin Xing Huangdi. Like, are we going to get land too? And so the Han carry that out. And they're like, okay, yes, we'll give you some plots of land. But what the Han doesn't do is they don't take land from the aristocracy like Shin did. They're like, okay, the land that was originally given to peasants is the land that we are going to use to continue to give peasants land. We'll just cut it up into like smaller and smaller pieces. Well, I mean, if you're working with a finite amount of land and you're just cutting it up into smaller and smaller pieces, and the population of the peasants get larger and larger and larger, then that land gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And so you're going to end up by the end of the Han Dynasty with peasant rebellion over that. So, why did the Han fall? Again, because of the land, but also because of really weak leadership. You also see this too during empires throughout history. You can kind of see it coming. And it's one of those like, the original leader of an empire, like he understands kind of the blood, sweat, and tears that went into founding that empire, or fighting off his adversaries. And, like there's a, again, there's like an intrinsic motivation there because I won, I did this. And so and so again, there's that real true appreciation and grit towards keeping it together and holding it together and leading well, or leading with force and determination. But as the generations go by, and the kids of that original ruler are more and more separated from that original strife, they lose sight of what it took to get power and then keep it. I had an old volleyball coach that used to tell me like satisfaction breeds complacency. And that's true. Like they got satisfied. They got also used to like, this is my family. This is our role. This is what we do. We have the power. And instead of actually truly earning the leadership by doing the job, they just kind of sat back and enjoyed the work of their ancestors before them and didn't do the job. And again, you see this time and time again in history. It's like you've got, like the great grandfather was really great. And then, the grandfather is good too, because he's the son of the great grandfather. But, and it's like as it gets further and further along, you lose effective leadership because of complacency and entitlement. So, anyways, so you have weak rulers, lots of corruption because, again, weak rulers. People are going to take advantage of that. And then these peasant uprisings. And so when the Han Dynasty falls, you actually have China break apart into these smaller territories, and they won't like emerge or merge together as a unified China again for another like 400 years. So that is it for the Han. And there's my bell. So it's time for me to end too. And again, we're watching this at the first of class tomorrow and then taking your formative. And then y'all have a great weekend. Bye-bye.